Hello once again. In this installment, we're going to talk about Egyptian mythology. Egyptian mythology is actually part of a grander mythology called Near Eastern mythology. However, there's several areas, several countries that represent Near Eastern mythology, so it's a little too much to put in one video. So I'm going to devote this video to just Egypt. Um, Basically, to start off with, when it comes to Egyptian mythology, is I would say to kind of get your feet wet a little bit. There's this great little book that I read years ago called simply The Egyptian Gods, a handbook, by Alan W. Shorter. And it really is kind of like a neat little handbook because it's not very long. It gives some of the central stories of about the Egyptian gods. And what's really neat about this book is that, as you can tell by the cover, you know how those gods are very complicated from Egypt. They all have these weird headdresses and everything. Well, this book really helps you, especially at the back. It helps you to identify which gods are which, depending on what they're wearing, what they hold, what headdress they have, and stuff like that. So it's a good little primer in a way. The next book I would go to for those who really love the art of storytelling. There's two books I have here that are kind of old, but they're probably they're considered classics. Or at least I hope they are. Uh, they're probably free to download because they're so old. There's Egyptian Myth and Legends by Donald A. Mackenzie. This is a very old book. It's probably outdated in many aspects, but what's really nice about this really old book and the next book that I'm going to talk about is that these old authors really give us they really try and be storytellers, and they give us just about all the important beautiful myths that have come down to us from ancient Egypt, like the shipwrecked sailor and the tale of the eloquent peasant and the two brothers, in addition to the more common stuff about Isis and Horus and Osiris and stuff like that. So this book is really great. I mean, the historical cultural stuff might be outdated, but it's still a great little book if you enjoy sitting through some great storytelling. Another book that's similar to this is also of an old classic. It's part of a series called Myths and Legends, and it's simply called Egypt, and it's by Lewis Spence. Lewis Spence many years ago wrote a lot of books on world mythology. He wrote a ton of them. And this is the one that he had on Egypt. Yeah, say hey, how you doing? Say hi. I'm trying to do a video, okay? So try not to bother me right now. I'll play with you later. Okay, thank you. So anyway, so those two books are these really old classic retellings. Okay, another book that I think is great if you want to get into actual English translations of some of these old stories. There's this really good book called Legends of the. This is another very old book, but this actually has scholarly translations of many of the stories, not all the stories, but many of them, and it's by that great old scholar that a lot of people know about, E.A. Wallis Budge, and he wrote a lot of books in his time on anything Egyptian. And this particular book is called Legends of the Egyptian Gods, Hieroglyphic Texts and Translations. So this is great because it's like, woo, it's like he's got the hieroglyphics on one page and he's got translations on the other. So this book is a must-have. It's a real treasure if you're really into translations. And what's really, really good about this book is that even though the story of Isis and Osiris and their battle with Set is such an important role to come out of Egypt, I've often heard it being said that there's a lot of different versions that the Egyptians have, but there isn't any one continuous narrative that has a beginning, a middle, at the end, except for one, and it's written by a non-Egyptian. It's actually written by the Greek historian Plutarch. He's the one that left us the narrative of Isis and Osiris and Set and Horus. and which is probably the most important story to come out of Egypt. And it was actually, you know, given to us in large extent. I mean, the story goes back to ancient Egypt, but the continuous narrative that has a, like I said, that goes straight through. It's not broken up. Is actually given to us by Plutarch. And what's great about this book is that it has an English translation of the Greek from the Greek that Plutarch wrote us. So if you're interested in, it's been referenced in many other books. Anytime that you hear about Isis and Osiris, they always talk about Plutarch's version in addition to others. And if you ever want to read his version, it's actually in this book. So it's worth looking into. Now you've read several books already. Now moving forwards, and you want to read something a little more scholarly. You've read a few. You've read some scholarly stuff, but so far we've really talked about English translations or retellings of the myths. Now you want to read something a little more in depth about the gods and goddesses and stuff and what they meant to the culture, and something up to date. There's this really good book from the Library of the World's Myths and Legends. I've mentioned this series before, and it's simply called Egyptian Mythology, and it's by Veronica Ions. Veronica Ions, and this is a great book. Don't be fooled by the thinness. It's got beautiful illustrations. It's fairly modern. It's not an old book. I mean, you know, again, some of the scholarship might be a little old, but it's not a very old book. I found it very enjoyable, and she takes a very God by God approach. So as you're reading through the story, as you're reading through the book, she goes from God to God to God to God, and anything relevant to them. I read this book years ago, and flipping through it before I did this video I don't think she includes all of the stories that are associated with the Egyptian mythology, especially my favorite, the two brothers. She might, I don't remember. I couldn't find it while I was flipping through it, but it's okay. But it's because it's in the previous books. Finally, if you really want to get into scholarly stuff, there's this book by R.T. Rudley Clark. R.T. Rudley Clark, and it's called Myth and Symbol, Ancient Egypt. Myth and Symbol in Ancient Egypt. And boy, this was a tough one to get through. It's about the of course you could tell by the title, it's not only about myth, it's about symbology, it's about the culture, it's about the religion, it's about how the Egyptians saw the gods. It could be a little tough to get through. It could be a little opaque and dense at times because it's really not exactly light reading. But if you're serious about wanting to know more about Egyptian mythology after you've acquainted yourself with the stories in the previous books, this is really a great book to read. What I really love about what's really great about this book is that I actually brought this book with me to Egypt when I went back in the 90s. Yeah, see, I still kept my boarding pass, if you don't believe me. It's Egypt Air. And I found this boarding pass in this book. I forgot I had it. And I kept it in this book because this is the book I brought with me when I went to Egypt. And the tour guide said, hey, this is a really good book, because he knew about this book and he knew it was he probably had to read it as to be a tour guide. And not only that, when I went into the bookstore in my hotel that I was staying at in Cairo, they actually had a copy of this. I didn't think there was going to be anything in English, but it was. This is not the actual copy that I purchased from there. This is the one I bought from America and brought back. So this actual copy has been to Egypt. Okay, so that's it for Egypt. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about the other civilizations that are involved in Near Eastern mythology. Okay, till next time, happy reading.